here shortly. There we go. Thank you to Aaron Fry behind the scenes, making this all run very smoothly. So it is, once again, welcome everyone to Culture Works webinar about reopening arts and culture safely. I'm excited to see so many of you here after a very long and dark 15 months of relative inactivity in the arts and culture sector. I'm so excited about the momentum that I see in the arts and culture community. I'm seeing more and more announcements about performances and exhibits and even full seasons in the months ahead. And that is just thrilling to see Richmond coming back like that. I wanted to share a little bit about what to expect in the hour ahead. We're going to hear from some experts to help us figure out how we do all that safely, right? So we want to open with great enthusiasm. We need to make sure we do it safely for the safety of our teams, of our patrons, our artists, and our community. And so we have with us a couple of experts that I'll introduce in a moment from the Virginia Department of Health. We also will hear from a couple of our peers, folks leading arts and culture organizations themselves and making real-time decisions about what reopening is going to look like. And so we have Kay Alferio from the Cultural Arts Center at Glen Allen with us. We also have Jess Burgess from Dogtown Dance. And we also have Justin Lauder. Many of the questions that I got in advance of this session were from folks asking questions more in the legal space. And so thought it would make sense to have an attorney with us today as well. Justin is also a Culture Works board member, so thank you. Thank you to Justin. Thank you to all of our speakers for being with us today to help us to navigate these waters. Real quickly, I'm going to ask Aaron to share sort of our etiquette around Zoom, just to help this run smoothly. Aaron, you want to take it over from there?
Sure. Good morning, everyone.
Aaron, I can't hear you. You're on mute, I think.
I'm not on mute. One sec. Let me see.
There we go.
So weird. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Erin Fry with Culture Works here. And just a reminder of general Zoom rules. If you are not speaking, just remain on mute and just stay on mute unless you're asked to unmute, please. And please share any comments or questions in the chat box. And again, we are recording this. So if there's something that you missed, there's no need to ask for it again. We'll have it recorded for you. And obviously keep language in the chat respectful and relevant to the conversation. And that is it. I'll put all of that into the chat as well. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Aaron. And with that, I understand that Dr. Danny Avula, Danny is our Virginia vaccine coordinator and the health director for the Richmond and Henrico health districts. So who better than to share with the Richmond Arts and Culture organizations some information about the state of vaccinations across the Commonwealth. So Danny, if you are ready, we've made you a co-host. I understand you had some slides you'd like to share.
Yeah, just a couple. I'll pop in here, Scott. And oh, yes, it is up now. Thanks, Aaron. All right, here we are. Let me minimize this and present this. So
I just want to say thank you, Danny, for everything you have done to keep us all safe and help us navigate all these waters. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Scott. It's definitely been an all hands on deck effort. Certainly throughout VDH, our local health district has done a phenomenal job of it's just at every stage, right? Contact tracing, case investigation, testing, and now vaccination. And we're in a really good place. And I think both by, kind of the hard metrics of our percent positivity and the number of cases that we're seeing. I mean, we've been averaging, our 7-day moving average is like 145 cases throughout the entire state of Virginia right now. And, there are plenty of days where we had well in excess of that at the locality level. So really sort of just a remarkable difference of where we're at now than where we were back in December, January, February. And hopefully you all are starting to feel the hope and optimism of that. So I'll just give a quick snapshot of where we are from a vaccination standpoint, and then Dr. Forlano will talk more about what that actually means and how that's translating into guidelines and mitigation efforts, and it can be pretty free flowing, and happy to answer any questions. But as of today, we are really marching towards the president's goal. Hopefully you all have heard the headlines saying that America is trying to get to 70% of adults with one dose by July 4th. That's kind of the first somewhat arbitrary benchmark, but good to have something to be shooting for. A lot of states, about 14 states, have met that benchmark already, and Virginia is well on its way. Today, we are at 69.5% of our 18 and older population with at least one dose. So I expect sometime next week we'll cross the 70% threshold, and that will certainly be something to celebrate. But I say it's somewhat arbitrary because it's not the end of our vaccination effort. You know, our goal to really truly get to some degree of community immunity that's going to stop or really delay the transmission of COVID, you know, when we expect to see more circulating virus in the fall, in the winter, that's going to require somewhere between 70 and 80% of the entire population vaccinated and protected against COVID. And so while 70% of the adult population with one dose is a good benchmark, we really have a lot more work to do. And that will become more and more possible as we anticipate sometime in the fall that this vaccine will get approved for kids under the age of 12. We've made some pretty decent progress. We've had about a month, a little bit over a month of the vaccine being approved for 12 to 15-year-olds. And right now we're above somewhere around 35% of that segment that has been vaccinated. Some other, I guess the other piece that is worth talking about is that, you know, we really have certain geographic areas of our state that are driving the vaccination rates. And so you look at these darker shaded Northern Virginia, the Richmond area is doing well, and then the Charlottesville area, and then pockets of the Eastern region. But you see the very light color throughout Southern Virginia and certainly into Southwest Virginia. And so we've got work to do in those communities as well. And to some degree, like the rurality of those communities will in and of itself prevent the spread of disease because people just aren't seeing other people as much. They're not coming into contact with others as much. But you know, there are some communities where, you know, this number, the 69.5%, looks more like 35%. And so the vaccine effort will not be overcut when we hit that 70% goal. We will continue to really press into areas and demographics where we're seeing lower uptake rates. Just showed another way, we need to average about 3,000 doses a day. It's a little bit lower than that now, but to get to that 70% goal. And we've been averaging over the last week over 6,000 new adults getting a first dose. So there's still a decent amount of demand throughout the Commonwealth. And here's what the vaccination effort has looked like. I mean, you all remember those early months since January where it was just, it was hard to come by. You had to wait until you fell into one of the risk categories. And then some of that started to shift in late February, early March. And then when supply really became plentiful, we just skyrocketed. And there was a whole month of April where we averaged over 80,000 doses a day. A lot of days where we vaccinated in excess of 100,000 people, and just a remarkable effort from our health departments, our pharmacies, our doctors' offices, and our health systems, all really banding together to get Virginia vaccinated. Since the beginning of May, you know, we kind of hit that saturation point. And so we saw that vaccination rate really start to drop until about May 16th or so. And what happened there, two things. One, we had a vaccine that was approved for the 12 to 15-year-olds, as I mentioned. And so that added to a little bit of this uptick of vaccination. But really what happened was the CDC looked at the science, saw that fully vaccinated people were at extremely low risk, certainly to get the disease, which we've known for some time, but also at extremely low risk of spreading the disease. And so the culmination of a number of studies really led to an updated CDC recommendation that fully vaccinated people no longer needed to wear masks in most settings. And so that recommendation really served as a motivator to a lot of people. And so what we saw throughout the end of May was this big uptick in vaccine because of that motivation. And what a lot of other surveys have shown us is that that return to normalcy, the ability to do stuff that we all have missed for a year and a half, is actually one of the biggest motivators for people to actually get vaccinated. Since then, we hit another saturation point and have seen a downward trend, little bit of an upward trend over the last few days, but really this correlates to the second doses that our 12 to 15-year-olds were getting back here, and so that's why you see that uptick. But we are going to continue to work hard and try to get to some of these other demographics that have been more hesitant. And so just a few to name them: rural communities, a lot of work to be done there. Younger people, so 16 to 30, while we have done really well in the elderly community, so the 65 and up, we have 85+% of Virginians who are 65 and up that have had at least one dose. But that number is under 50% for your 16 to 30-year-olds. And so really helping young people understand what the value proposition is. So many of those folks aren't necessarily against being vaccinated, but they're like, if it's not going to change my life and COVID's not that bad, then I'm not necessarily going to spend the time and energy to make an appointment or go see a doctor or whatever. And so a lot of our efforts really are shifting to more community-based vaccination, going to places where there's a lot of foot traffic, making vaccine as accessible and easy to access as possible. And then there are segments of the community where we've got to work through real hesitancy issues. There have been a lot of myths and misinformation out there that have really impacted the remaining segment of our community who's not vaccinated. And so things like, if I had COVID, do I actually need to get vaccinated? The answer is yes, but most people don't know that, or are being told that they don't need to. Or the really misinformation around fertility, for example. There's a lot of young adults of reproductive age who have heard that maybe this vaccine can cause you to be infertile and so have chosen not to get it, or parents of adolescents who don't want to take that risk. So despite evidence really showing that that is not true, the misinformation and disinformation that has been circulating around the internet has definitely moved a lot of people into that camp. So a lot of work that we're going to continue to do over the next few months, probably the next 4 to 6 months. And then as we have a vaccine that's approved for younger kids, there'll be a wave of vaccination there. And then it'll be pretty close to the time where we may need boosters. A lot of people are asking over the last couple of weeks, we're hearing a lot about, will we need booster shots? How will they be delivered? And the answer is, like, most likely we will need boosters. We don't know when that will be needed. And there's kind of two main pieces of information that would drive that. One would be, how long does vaccine-mediated immunity actually last? And what we've seen from the clinical trials and from kind of real life of people who started to get vaccinated in December is that those individuals still have strong immunity 6-8 months out. We do anticipate that may start to wane at around a year, and so we'll continue to follow the data around that to determine how long that immunity lasts. The other point, the information point that'll help make the decision is, how pressing are the variants and are our vaccines effective against them? And we've been lucky. These variants are real. They have moved quickly. We really saw in kind of about a 60-day time period here in the US that the UK variant went from under 10% of new cases to over 70% of new cases. And now what you're hearing about is the Delta variant that was first identified in India has really become a global presence, 80 different countries that are reporting it. We've certainly seen it here in Virginia. And pretty quickly, end of May, we were about 2.7% in the United States of new cases that were the Delta variant. And then by by last week, that's up to about 9%. And it is predominated in the UK. It's taken over about 90% of their new cases. So we expect that we're going to see more and more spread from these new mutations. But thankfully, the vaccines have been really effective against them. There was new data this past week that the CDC put out that showed if you are fully vaccinated, and this was specifically with Pfizer, but that you are 88% protected, which is really fantastic. Interesting to note that with one dose, that number is 30%. So really important that everybody who gets a first dose also gets a second dose to get fully protected. So that's what the next few months looks like. It's going to be slower work, harder work, but it really is about addressing communities that have hesitancy around vaccination and then making vaccine as ubiquitous and available and easy to access as possible. And hopefully, these numbers stay low, although from the public health science, there's every reason to believe that this virus really will start to circulate more as we enter into the winter months. Thankfully, we'll be at an even better place in terms of our vaccination numbers by then. So I'm optimistic, but we need to keep pressing on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avula. Greatly appreciate that. You talked about educating younger audiences and those folks who are unvaccinated. If CultureWorks or many of the groups on this call can be helpful spreading things, any graphics, infographics or things that you might have, or fact sheets, we've got a lot of email channels available to us among this group, so or social media channels. We'll give you helpful.
Yeah, that's great to know, Scott. And we actually, there's been a lot that has been generated for different audiences. It sits on our communications hub, but maybe what I'll do is I'll have someone on our comms team kind of think through just a few things that we could send your way and we could get them out through those networks. That'd be awesome.
That'd be great, thank you. With that, let me now turn things over to Dr. Laurie Forlano. Dr. Forlano is the Deputy Director of the Office of Epidemiology at the Virginia Department of Health. She's going to share more with us about the latest guidelines and what it means for our arts and culture organizations. So now let me figure out how to share my screen. Dr. Forlano, welcome.
Hi there.
Let's see. Can we see that?
Yep. Oh, want to put it in.
Where's yours?
Yeah, if you could just put it in slideshow view, I think that could help.
Yep.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I guess it's morning still for 30 more minutes. My name's Laurie Forlano. I work at VDH in the Central State Office. Live here in Richmond City. And the first thing I want to say is Danny and I give a lot of these talks, but there's a different kind of pressure when you're performing in front of a bunch of performers. So appreciate the time today. And the other thing, I do want to just take a minute to explain a little bit of who I am. I am a public health person, but also a mom of two. Both of my girls are heavily interested in the arts and theater and music. I'm pretty sure I saw their theater teacher on this call. So I've seen a lot of familiar names here because my kids are involved with Spark and Virginia Rep, and I'm a huge lover of the arts. I'm a daughter of a music teacher, played the violin my whole life. So I very, very much appreciate everything you all do. And one thing I'm looking forward to is just to see what the arts birth out of this next phase of life. And I'm so grateful for all of you for just making our lives a little more interesting and beautiful. And the other thing I'll note is the arts organizations that the community mitigation team has worked with throughout the pandemic, when all of the restrictions in place, et cetera, have just been great partners. And what I've seen is a theme of just all of you really just wanting to do the right thing. So thank you for that, because part of that diligence has gotten us to where we are. Yes, hi, Mr. Smith. I thought I saw his name. So, okay, so let's get moving. Danny, you can go to the next slide, Scott. Danny kind of covered the trajectory, but I really like this visual because you can see where we've been and where we are. And I can't describe the last year. I can't really remember half of the last year, but where we are now just feels so good. And there is a lot of optimism, but in public health, we always have cautious optimism and like to remain vigilant and prepared. So we're hoping to talk with all of you about that today. But you can obviously see the epidemic curve. And I think I did see in the chat, there's a lot of great information online at VDH. So if you go to the next slide, one concept I just did want to walk you through a little bit more, because I think what you'll see in a lot of the guidance documents that come out for different sectors, community sectors, are one thing we say to people is pay attention to what's going on in your community. What's the level of transmission like? And we certainly don't expect all of you to be epidemiologists, but more importantly, know how to contact your local health department, but also become familiar with our website. And there's lots of data there that's pretty easy to digest. The key elements that you'll need. CDC has started incorporating what they call these levels of community transmission. They color code them. There's 4 colors: blue, yellow, orange, red. Shortly put, blue is better, red is not so good. And they're determined by 2 main metrics. The first metric is the
People who are dependent on a drug don't necessarily have addiction. Many medications can cause dependence.
That's okay, great. The level of transmission is determined by one of 2 measures. The first is case incidence. So that's the number of new cases in 1 week per 100,000. And you can see the different quantitative measures that you have to hit to get to a different level. The second is test positivity, so the number of positive tests over all the tests conducted. And whichever number has the higher value, that's the one you use. Most always, we advise people use that first row first. So what's going on with the number of cases in the population? So if you go to the next slide, this just tells the story of what's happened over the last 6 months. So in January, it's very obvious what was going on. That was the peak of the curve, the peak of the pandemic here in Virginia. And you can see this online. The easiest place to find this is on our pandemic metrics webpage, and there's a tab that says school metrics. Schools have been using this model for several months, but it's a really easy way to see where your locality is. So you can click on Richmond City and you can get specific metrics for that locality, or Henrico County, Chesterfield, whatever you need to see. But I love this kind of time lapse visual here, because you can really see the progress we've made, and it took a lot of hard work to get there. But it also this illustrates that you can get county or city level data to help you think through what's going on and what choices you might want to be making. So if you go to the next slide, the concept of prevention with COVID-19 is layers. Combining these strategies together is typically safer than using 1 or 2 measures alone. There are instances in which you'd have to choose masks and physical in addition to vaccination, of course. Masks and physical distancing tend to be our priorities as far as the non-pharmaceutical interventions. So that's what we focus on a lot in our guidance document, but all of these other strategies help as well. Of course, cleaning routinely. There's testing programs. We're really trying to make sure we have a testing landscape available and testing infrastructure so people have access to testing. Contact tracing, obviously, the capacity for that is in a much, much better place than it was a year ago. Not only is the volume of cases down, but our workforce is much larger and just more comprehensive than it was a year ago. So that's great news that we have the ability and capacity to respond timely, which wasn't always the case, particularly in the beginning of the pandemic. And that wintertime peak, the volume was such that it was really difficult to keep pace. During that time, when there were no vaccines and no treatment, and we were still building capacity, That's when we had to institute these population level interventions, which were uncomfortable, fairly foreign, even to us in public health. I mean, never in my life could I have predicted that we would have shut down public schools for a year. You know, that's if that's not a sign of the gravity of this situation, I don't know what is. So we're really grateful that those population level restrictions have gradually been peeled back. And I think Virginia did a really good job in pacing that. And you know, the public health mind in me, you know, our team, we always lean towards the safest and the science base, and that's where our perspective. We really needed to learn from stakeholders like all of you about what's feasible and practical. And because some of these interventions obviously did not come with no harm. And we understand the impact to businesses and the economy and public education and all of those things. So I'm really glad we're in a little bit better place of a norm. You can go to the next slide. So the community mitigation team, there's a couple colleagues I have on the call today. Rebecca Thomason is on, I think Tess as well. Julie Henderson in our Office of Environmental Health. We've been working together with businesses for about 15 months now through a series of executive orders that have gone into place and been dialed back and then dialed up. The last kind of lifting of business level restrictions in Executive Order 79 were lifted on May 28th, towards the end of May, including essentially including the lifting of the individual level mask mandate, with some exceptions being there for healthcare settings, homeless shelters, and also K-12 schools is still they essentially have a universal mask wearing requirement right now. There's a little complexity, but the existing executive order, the existing governor's declaration of emergency expires on June 30th, which impacts the fate of the current executive order. But essentially the individual level mask mandate has become a should. So we're advising that fully vaccinated people really don't need to wear a mask in most public settings. There's some exceptions to that. But unvaccinated people still do need to think carefully and wear that mask, particularly when they're indoors or in crowded settings, whether they're indoors or outdoors. So that's the guidance we continue to give. And I think Danny gave the science and the rationale to that. So although those capacity limits and distancing and other requirements were lifted roughly about Memorial Day, we're continuing to encourage business partners like all of you and other establishments to follow VDH and CDC public health recommendations: masking, distancing, hand washing, cleaning, all of those strategies that can help prevent disease transmission. There is some new guidance on our website. It's entitled VDH General Recommendations for Businesses. We can send the hyperlink and the slides and all that to Scott afterwards. There's a preview of it here on the screen, and that will reflect a lot of the recommendations we're making to businesses and other establishments. We're happy to continue to advise industries in different settings, schools, faith-based organizations, retail, arts groups, on what kind of strategies you may want to use to continue to help keep COVID-19 at bay. The next slide. And I know there were some questions about this that got sent to us ahead of time. So one question we received is that while mask mandates and physical distancing are no longer required, it's still recommended as a good practice. And that's true. So CDC now recommends that anyone that is fully vaccinated, so that's both doses of a 2-dose series, and then 2 weeks after that, can participate in indoor and outdoor activities without wearing a mask and without distancing in most settings. Exceptions are schools, public transportation, healthcare facilities, homeless shelters, and correctional facilities. CDC has some great graphics online that can help people walk through those different scenarios. So I encourage you to visit those, and these are on our website as well. Individuals that are not vaccinated or not fully vaccinated, so haven't finished that 2-dose series or haven't even started it or haven't had the opportunity to do so, like a young child, they should continue to mask and remain distanced to the extent that's possible in most settings. And then we do, recommend that they adhere to, fully vaccinated people adhere to masking in these special settings that's recommended, which are listed on the screen. So as a business or an establishment or an arts organization, you may choose to set your own mask policy. We would suggest at a minimum strongly encouraging masks and encouraging your patrons for anyone who may not be fully vaccinated to wear those masks, including children over the age of 2. And then another piece of advice, and I don't think this will be an issue for any of you, is just to cultivate an environment where if people want to wear masks, they can feel free to do so. And we certainly want to support that kind of culture. And even if you're vaccinated, there's a lot of reasons why someone might choose to wear a mask. I often wear one when I'm with my younger daughter, just to set an example for her to wear her mask because she's not vaccinated yet. So there's a lot of reasons why people choose to wear masks, and we want to make them comfortable doing so. I will address this right now. There was a question about, I know there's been some recent press about a provision of the Code of Virginia that speaks to wearing masks to conceal one's identity. And I believe that's a punishable with a felony charge. The spirit and intent of that law, as I understand it, is people wearing masks to just do that, conceal their identity, maybe committing a crime. So that provision of the law has been waived essentially or handled in executive orders to date. So obviously when the executive order goes away, there is a little bit of a conflict there. My understanding of the governor's direction there, and I know he and his staff have communicated to law enforcement partners, is that we certainly want Virginians who wear masks for health reasons and are not doing it to conceal their identities. They are not running afoul of the law, as the governor's spokesperson said, and they're aiming to clarify that law in an upcoming General Assembly session. Until then, the governor has made it clear to law enforcement partners that we expect no Virginians to be penalized for wearing masks for protection against COVID-19. There is obviously some discretion there, but that's the intent, and so we're hopeful that won't really cause many problems. Next slide. So some considerations for you, just to reiterate. Encourage vaccination of your staff, of your patrons. We have a lot of great social media shareables and signage, templates, all kinds of resources. So please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like some of those tools. Strongly recommending masks and distancing for any patrons or employees that are not vaccinated is a wise move. And allowing fully vaccinated people to wear those masks if they choose, as I was describing earlier. Encourage good hand hygiene. Washing your hands is always a good idea. Reminding people to do so right now is great. There's a lot of viral illnesses and colds going around right now because many people have removed their masks. So just be aware that there's definitely some run-of-the-mill respiratory viruses circulating as well. Routine cleaning is continued best practice, and ventilation practices, and there's information online about that. Next slide. We get a lot of questions about music performances, instrumental music. Let me cover this. Sorry, I got my slides mixed up. So just wanted to note that for gatherings, so some of you may host venues that obviously bring people together in a convened gathering. Some are outdoors, some are indoors, some are a little more free form, some have seated tickets. CDC walks through things to think about. What's the level of transmission? Are people coming from far and wide, or are they more local? Is it a venue that's more typically draws from a local community? Where is the event? Is it indoors, outdoors? Is there a way to distance people if they'd like to be distanced? How long is the event? How likely is it crowded? And what is the behavior of the event, attendees at the event likely to be? Is there alcohol being served? Is there, singing and screaming and shouting, those kinds of things? So just a lot of things to think about there. You can go to the next slide, but this didn't make it into the deck, I think, but I'll just mention it real quick. So for musical performances, and we can send this content later, I think we're updating a little guidance online. If possible, particularly when the weather's permitting, like this beautiful weather we've had this week, have your rehearsals outside if that's feasible. Take advantage of the summer weather to have performances outside when that's possible. The transmission levels are pretty low right now. So I think right now in the moment, while not zero risk, it's definitely lower risk than what we were experiencing several months ago. Thinking about additional measures, strategies like reducing the number of singers in an ensemble, or encouraging distance where that's possible, wearing masks. If you don't know the vaccination status of people in the ensemble, have them wear masks while rehearsing. That's always a good prevention strategy. Same for the brass and wind instrument performers. Sometimes there's tools on covering the instrument, but it can still be played. At least do that for rehearsals. And there are some masks that can be designed to be worn by playing, but I understand that might not be the most ideal situation. And of course, avoid sharing equipment, especially equipment that instruments that use mouth to be played. So for cleaning and disinfection, CDC recently updated their guidance when no people that have been confirmed to have COVID-19 or are highly suspected to have COVID-19 have been in a space. Cleaning once a day is typically enough to sufficiently remove virus that may be on surfaces. So I imagine many of you have routine cleaning staff or contractors that come in and do that. So that's considered fairly sufficient in that scenario. You might want to clean more frequently or choose to disinfect when certain conditions apply, like when we have higher transmission in a community, those graphs that I showed before. If there's a lower number of people wearing masks, or you can't guarantee hand hygiene, or if you happen to serve populations that might be at risk for more severe illness if they get COVID-19, the elderly, or if you're serving special needs populations or something like that. If there's been a sick person or someone who's test positive for COVID-19 in your facility in the last day or so, you should clean and disinfect, and there's guidance and more specific instructions online. So lastly, and Rebecca's put links to that in the chat. Thanks, Rebecca. Go to the next slide. Just wanted to let you know there's lots of resources online. We have signage toolkits that you can use in your restrooms, or as people enter the space, or your ticket booths. And there's also a pretty comprehensive webpage for businesses in general, which we continually revisit and update. So I encourage you to look at that. We're looking at some other states. The Minnesota Department of Health has a particularly robust page on some performances and musical performances. So we're trying to pull from them a little bit, but until then, feel free to visit our colleagues in Minnesota. And please let us know if you need different kinds of information. And you can call us anytime. The local health departments, I think, have a little bit more bandwidth right now than they did a few months ago, but the community mitigation team at VDH is also happy to advise on any specific questions. So that's most of the content I had today. I'm happy to go through, I think I covered some of the questions that we had received. I can go through just one or two now. One was about if we have special guidance for organizations that cater to younger artists. So there's a few places you can go for that. I think our school guidance is a good resource. for how to handle serving kids, particularly kids under 12 that will not be vaccinated at this point in time. The CDC is revisiting its school guidance. We think they will have something newly published by July. So we're really keeping our eye on that, and we're happy to let you know when that's available. But and they also recently updated camp guidance for those of you who run day camps or even overnight camps. And they give just a lot of detailed information about how to handle those settings. But if you're serving kids under 12, they should be wearing masks when indoors and distanced where that's possible. The combination of those two strategies is what we like to see. But we understand that feasibility comes into play there, but we would strongly encourage those strategies. Let me see here, some other questions. We got a question on, do we have any sense as to how these guidelines will change in say by the winter time? This will be the first winter during the pandemic where we have a larger portion of people vaccinated. So I think that's great news. But as Danny was alluding to, we can't really predict those trends perfectly. We can get an idea. There is thought to be seasonality to COVID-19 as with other respiratory viruses. So the recommendations we have now is stick to our website, watch the trends, talk to your local health department. CDC's COVID data tracker also has great visuals for county level data. And during those higher levels of transmission, you may want to be talking to your local health department about how you might want to dial up certain prevention strategies a little bit if cases start to increase. So it might be useful to have a plan for how you might do that if it's needed. I think I talked about cleaning. We got a couple, I'd say legal type questions. I was glad to hear there's a lawyer on the phone because we're often asked those questions. And although I wish I would have gone to law school after this year, I didn't. So happy to give you our thoughts on certain questions, but can't really offer legal advice there. So I think that's all I've got, Scott. I'm happy to just, take questions or whatever you need at this point in time.
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. Let me get my video going again. I'm going to unshare the screen too. You can see more of your faces. So while we do have Dr. Forlano and Dr. Avula on here, what other questions do folks have? I'll ask you to kind of use the raise your hand icon on the or the chat feature to voice any new questions that might have come up during the session today. Anyone have any other questions besides the legal ones? And then I'll turn it to Justin to ask the legal ones. I'm not seeing any on my limited screen. Anyone have questions? Erin, are you seeing anything in the chat? I can't see the chat for some reason.
No.
Thank you. Then let me turn to Justin and Dr. Forlano and Dr. Avula. I'll ask if you can stay on for a while. I suspect the next segment may generate additional questions as well. And we will be happy to share, with your permission, the slides from today. Dr. Forlano, if that's all right with you, I'll share the slides along with the video that we're recording, and we'll take the chat and turn it into an FAQ. And certainly if there's other links that you want to share with this group, you can send that out and we'll include that in the group as well. So Justin, the legal question that came up was really about the legal or ethical considerations for sharing with the public that all instructors have been vaccinated, for example. Not sure about the ability to share that kind of information about your own staff with the public. Any thoughts you can share on that piece?
Yes, well, first, thanks for having me, Scott, and thanks to the doctors and all your wonderful work getting us to this place. Thank you. Also, too, just a quick disclaimer, this is not legal advice. I'm speaking generally. If you have specific questions for your organization, please contact an attorney and analyze based on your facts. Also, too, I'm an entertainment attorney, business and intellectual property. I don't spend my days on healthcare law or personal injury law. So as we talk about these issues, I have a general awareness of the issues given the venues and clients I work with, but I wouldn't claim to be a HIPAA expert or a personal injury attorney. With respect to sharing the fact that your staff is fully vaccinated, my understanding is that HIPAA applies to specific healthcare organizations and would not apply to a venue, for example, or a nonprofit organization unless it happens to fall within one of those specific classes. Also, too, this is information that's being freely shared by employees to their employer, right? It's not information that the organization has obtained directly from healthcare providers. So making that statement, so long as it's factually true, presumably should be fine. Now, there is a question of, has that been verified? What information do you know? What do you have? So if you're going to make that statement, I would certainly make sure you feel confident that it's accurate, right? So if you don't know, then don't state it, because that's essentially fraudulent. So ethically, I mean, that's between you and your ethics advisor, but legally, I don't see an issue.
Thanks, Justin. One other question we got was around, as folks are formulating their policies in regard to recommending participants be vaccinated, as Dr. Forlano was talking about, are there any examples of templates that we might be able to share? And I know, Justin, you shared with me some examples of templates already, or examples already that are publicly available, and I'll include those along with this video and the other resources that we put out there. Are there any
So I'll look to see if I can find any more for you to share, Scott. But generally, we have to ask, what is the claim? What is the liability? What are we protecting against? And we're protecting against participants in our facilities, participants in our programs from getting sick. And for us to have liability, there has to be willful misconduct, or there has to be negligence. And negligence is a failure to act with reasonable care, right? And for that claim to have legs, you need to show negligence or willful misconduct. You need to show causation, and then you need to show damages, right? So first, have we been willful, right? Did we have an event and set up a kissing booth and say, come on, have some fun, right? Yeah, that's willful, right? Or grossly negligent, especially given the 2021 probably was grossly negligent. And I don't know, I mean, you see at the county fair maybe, but first, were we following the guidelines? The doctors have provided us with wonderful guidelines and resources to show that, you know what, we are being reasonable, right? We're listening to the experts. We're listening to what not only the health professionals have set forth for us, but also to what the governor and the laws say. So, stay within the lines, right? Don't try to be the risk taker, right? Don't walk the tightrope. Just, you know what, you have your settings. If you stay within them, it's going to be very difficult to show that you've been negligent. Causation, especially now with the wonderful rate of vaccinations, right? Someone would have to show that they actually caught the virus at your event. So causation is going to be difficult to show unless there's a cluster, and likely a cluster would be hard at this point. And then finally, there'd have to be damages. So at the end of it, what is the actual damage? And that's if the person even knows they are sick. If they're asymptomatic and never know about it, then it probably would never be an issue anyway. So I just say follow the guidelines set forth and listen to the experts. Also, too, one last piece is, you can use language as far as assumption of risk, right? There's a defense of assumption of risk. At this point, everyone knows COVID-19 exists. Some may choose not to believe it, but plenty of information is available. So there's language that you see popping up. Just on Friday, I was buying tickets for the Counting Crows. Super stoked for that show. And there is language that ASM, one of the biggest promoters in the world, venue operators, is using. And you click the box, right? You are assuming the risk, and it discloses all the information about the pandemic. And then also too, there's limitation of liability language. That's something to note in Virginia. There's limited limitation of liability with respect to certain activities is limited to what you can actually limit it contractually. And also too, that language needs to be conspicuous. So I'd say if you're approaching it from a contractual click the box limitation of liability, speak with an attorney to make sure that language fits your purpose and accomplishes your goals. But yeah, one, just on the facts, is there a claim? Two, with the contract and people buy tickets, you can give yourself some contractual protection as well. So.
Good advice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Not legal advice.
And actually, that wasn't legal advice. That was general advice.
Not legal advice. Just
My attorney told me I had to say that disclaimer.
good suggestion. Good. Thank you, Justin. Greatly appreciate it. Any other questions from the audience for any of our first three speakers? Folks at the moment. Feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand digitally. Oh, I see Brett Fonda raising a hand, or is that just applause?
No, that is me raising my hand. Thank you all for great information you provided. Considering that many or most of the arts organizations either on here or not plan pretty far in advance, we are mostly, I think, given what we're hearing now, planning for capacity limits not to be in place for our fall and spring seasons. Given the uncertainty, is that a smart decision by you all? From what you're saying, you know, with the spikes, we have nothing but, you know, data to go on right now and speculation on what it's going to be like. But since Broadway, for one, is planning 100% capacity, and we're hearing, you know, going to concerts and stuff, or is that what you all would both recommend? Not you, Justin, as much, but you know, that's what we're all planning right now? Is that a smart decision?
I can start, Danny. I think that's the best decision to make with the information we have in the moment. And you know, it's not the easiest answer or the best answer, but, you know, change is a constant. And that is the truth about these pandemics. I have confidence that clearly the vaccines have had an impact on the curve. And I think we expect that to continue, but we shouldn't deny the fact that there are unknowns and uncertainties that could, you know, put a wrench in that trajectory. So I think having Plan B is prudent. But I don't know, Danny, if you want to add anything else.
No, totally agree. I think we should embrace the facts that these vaccines have been incredibly effective. We should celebrate that. Whatever you guys can do to help us get that message out and encourage more people to get vaccinated will mean we're even in a better place. But absolutely, I think you should move forward with those plans and have your contingency plans in your back pocket, because there may be a scenario that we either have you know, a significant wave or localized outbreaks, and that would lead us to make, you know, different decisions. But yeah, I think the more people we get vaccinated, the better off we are.
This is also reminding me of something I should have emphasized more when Danny said localized outbreaks. So for example, your staff and your patrons, but your staff, please encourage them to stay home if they are sick, enable that so that's possible. I'm confident that many of you have made it easy for your staff to go get vaccinated, you know, to take an hour and go get vaccinated if they need to. But really making that as easy as possible, and encouraging and a culture where staying home when you're sick is acceptable is a really, it's just those simple things are really impactful. So thanks for helping us spread that message as well.
Thank you for that. And I think as arts organizations, we're all pretty good at being creative. And we also have learned how to pivot very quickly. So we have all of that, seems like, in our back pocket, but the trajectory is going in the right direction. And like you both said, we have to pick a path. And the path right now that looks the best is that we can go forward with this. And if something changes, we all are used to that over the last 16 months or however long it's been. So thank you for that answer. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think I see, or it's not you, someone else in the chat talking about, language to use around required versus recommended. We still recommend masks be worn if you are not vaccinated. I mean, that remains a public health recommendation. It is not a requirement, with the exception of schools and other settings that I named. But absolutely, just to be clear, we definitely strongly recommend that people that aren't vaccinated continue to wear masks for now. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, with the colds circulating, I thought the other day, I'm gonna slap a mask on next time my kid has a cold, because I've learned that I've been reminded that it works.
And I think that will probably be more normal. I think we'll see a whole bunch more of people just wearing masks on the regular, especially during the winter. And let's get tested. There's tons of testing out there, and so for your teams, for your patrons, there are sort of cultural shifts that we really need to encourage, given the context we've been in for the last year and a half, and testing is one of those.
We are coming up on 12 o'clock, and I know, I believe Dr. Avula and Dr. Forlano may have other commitments they need to get to. Would you be open to me sending you a list of questions we still get in the chat and responding to us, that we can put those in the FAQ?
Happy to.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to do that.
Okay.
If you could copy Rebecca Thomason on that email, that would be great. Thanks, Scott.
I will do that. I will just again say thank you to Dr. Avula and to Dr. Forlano. You both and your teams have done so much, and we're grateful for that. Thank you. If folks can stay on, I believe Jess Burgess can stay on a little bit longer. Kay Alferio, I don't know if you're able to stay on and still give us your own perspectives. We're going to keep recording this, and so we can play it back for other audiences down the road. Dr. Avula, Dr. Forlano, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, everybody. Hope to see you out there soon. Take care.
And Justin, I don't know if you're able to stay on a little bit longer. I'm thinking maybe another 10 or 15 minutes if possible. With that, let's see, I still haven't heard from Kay if you are able to stay on a little bit longer. My apologies. We had our, obviously we have great information to share from the Virginia Department of Health, and wanted to make sure we give them appropriate time.
She's on, Scott, and she said yes, she's still on.
I'm only, for some reason, I'm only seeing the chat, the gallery in small 6 boxes today.
Okay.
So I wanted to hear from some folks who are sort of making these decisions in real time. One thing I hear as I'm talking to people is, I feel so alone as we're making these decisions. It would be great to hear how others are doing this. And so we try and connect people with others who are dealing with these situations. And so I wanted to ask, I'll just go alphabetically and start with you, Kay Alferio, to share your thoughts about sort of how have you been approaching this reopening and dealing with all of the guidance coming out and even looking for today. Your thoughts about what's working well as you think through that, and what have been the challenges.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I guess the way I would kind of position our opening is it's been staggered and conservative. We've taken a very conservative approach, and we've staggered our opening. We opened our doors in July, but we didn't really publicize much about it. But we had classes. They've all been socially distant classes. Everyone was required to wear a mask. And so it's worked for our visual arts. We've also had some dance classes. We had our dance classes, all of our dancers and instructors still had to wear masks, and they all danced. They all had their own 10-foot square area actually taped up on the floor. So they were definitely staying socially distant. And that's worked pretty well for us. We've also had art exhibits. Attendance has been lower, but at least we've gotten it up there. So we also tried some shows. The first shows we tried, we're at a third capacity. We have a theater of, we'll seat 360. We found that on average, when we clustered people in their germ groups, their germ families, and left 6 feet in between, we could use about 70 to 80 seats. So as most of you know, that doesn't make for a very profitable margin when you're talking about shows. So we did a couple of indoor shows when it was cold. Then we immediately moved outdoors, and we've had some great sold out outdoor shows. Again, we're using pods. People have been wearing masks until they get to their pods, then they can take them off. We've shortened all of our concerts to an hour so that we don't want to have an intermission, because we don't want to force everyone to the bathrooms at the same time, which would create a more of a concentrated group of people. Our water fountains are still turned off. We're doing all of that. So we've got one more outdoor show, and I will tell you that I believe people are craving live entertainment. We've planned to have one outdoor show. We've had them sell out so fast that we've ended up with 2, 3, or 4, with the performers just doing the same show repeatedly. So that's worked for us. Obviously, with the new guidance, our guidelines have changed. Our signage has now gone to, we welcome everyone to wear a mask, we encourage everyone to wear a mask, and we require that everyone who is not fully vaccinated wear a mask. But we're not policing it, so we're depending on the honesty of their hearts, which can take for what it is. But we are getting ready now as we're moving into this next phase. We are starting camps. I think, like somebody had already mentioned, there are a lot of recommendations and rules around camps, because they're kids. They all have to wear a mask. And because we don't want our instructors to look any different than our kids, our instructors, whether they're vaccinated or not, anytime they're with the kids, they will have a mask on as well. And it's that's been recommended so that the kids don't feel different than the instructors. So we're doing that. We're also coming back with shows starting in September. We'll be planning for full capacity. We will also, with only people who are not vaccinated wearing masks. Our contingency plan would be that if outbreaks start, if there's more concern, the first thing we could move to would be to require everyone in the audience to wear a mask. The next thing we could move to is to add more shows so that we can start to be socially distant. The first part of our season from September through December is all local. It's part of our commitment to support local performers. And as you all know, when we start bringing in national and international acts, it costs more money, and we've got to build a theater. So we'll start those. If everything goes like it should, we'll start all those in January and February. Most of those will be shows that we had booked 2 years ago, and now we're finally bringing them back in. So we'll be doing all of that. Concern-wise, I would say that, my biggest concern is, are our patrons really ready to come back? They seem to want to, but then when it comes right down to it, are they that ready? We have staffing shortages because people are not ready to come back to work. They don't want to work, whatever the reason is. But we do have staffing shortages, especially in our facilities and maintenance areas, which means that it makes it even harder for us to clean up to our new standards, which is immediately after every show, the theater, the room, the ballroom, whatever it is completely clean. When the mask regulations change, we're going to remain, because it says you can't be, whether you can or can't be masked in public. We're still going to require that everyone who is not vaccinated be masked, and we will encourage everyone to be masked. So that's what we're doing. I think as far as what's been helpful to us is that I think in arts more than anything else, we have staff who are really committed, not only to keeping their jobs, but they're committed to what it means. So I think that our staff has been incredible, and I don't know what we would have done without them. And I think too that just what we all do is that, we've got to move forward and really believe that the arts are transformational, that they make a difference in people's lives, and that they have a very healing quality to them, and that we're hoping that people are craving them. So we're going to move forward boldly where no one else has ever gone before, because we've never been here before. That's kind of what we're up to.
Thanks very much, Kay. Greatly appreciate that. Can we turn that to Jess Burgess, and then we'll have an opportunity for folks to ask questions of both Kay and Jess. Jess, can you share with us how you're approaching this at Dogtown Dance?
Hi, yes. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Scott and CultureWorks, for having me. I see so many friends that I haven't seen in God knows how long on this call. So hi to all of you. Hope you're doing well and staying safe. So yeah, I'm the executive director at Dogtown Dance Theater. We're a nonprofit dance space located in Manchester. It's a fairly large building. It's a 3-story former junior high school. So renovated classrooms are turned into dance studios. And then the gymnasium is a convertible theater. So, you know, God, after just like such a really hard year, or a little over a year rather, you know, both mentally for artists and everybody in the arts industry, but as well as like fiscally, financially, like being very realistic about that as you're looking at leadership and how you're approaching your, you know, the arts and culture sector, but then your own, you know, your own organization. We, just like what Kay just mentioned, and what I know we've heard from other folks, we really took a phased approach to our reopening at Dogtown. And that was really, one, to make sure that dancers and audiences were safe. That was top priority. But we also had to really just do things in a way that made sense for the organization. So we did reopen in August with very limited capacity. You know, the recommendations for dance were 10-foot social distancing in studios and no live shows. So, you know, we did the floor stickers in all of the studios. And since we weren't doing live shows, we actually were able to utilize that gym space as an additional studio, because it's so much bigger than the other studio spaces at Dogtown. It just helped the artists that were willing to come back and want to teach classes and or have rehearsals. It just allowed them to have, you know, a little bit more bodies in the space in the very onset of the reopening. You know, another thing that we did, I know that a lot of organizations have done, is we launched all of our virtual programming. So classes went into a hybrid model. So you could come take the in-person class with your masks on and the 10-foot social distancing, but then all of the instructors and artists at Dogtown were provided with professional Zoom accounts in each of the studios. And we had to upgrade all of the internet in the building, which I tell you is still an ongoing issue. Anyway, but and then we also launched a streaming service. So I like to call it kind of like Netflix for Dogtown. So when we did come back into live performances, you know, at the beginning it was very, very limited capacity. And so having the ability to offer performances in an online venue and done in a really professional way was important to us. You know, if you're also looking at just outreach in general for, you know, a performing arts, you know, a dance organization, you know, like having the ability for folks in New York or North Carolina or Colorado see the performances afterwards online was just a really like important step for us. And so that's not going anywhere. That component of Dogtown's programming is definitely going to remain in place. So in February, we always do our annual Mardi Gras event, which is normally a very packed house, like 300 plus, right? That went completely virtual, and we did not do any kind of live component, but it was important for us in terms of supporting the artists at Dogtown. And then also, you know, grant requirements, you know, funding that we had received, like, you know, meeting those requirements for that funding, that we still had that performance. And so that was completely live on our Dogtown stream platform. Then the end of April, we had our first live person in show back. That was the Dogtown Presenter Series. Programming wise, we decided to make it a concert of only solos. It was a Daniel Nagrin performance, all solos, which was wonderful, and you know, kept numbers down backstage for, you know, our crew, which was also very limited. We only had 2 backstage folks, like where we normally try to have 8 to 10. And we only did 30 in the house, in the audience, and masks were required for audience members. So You know, that was kind of the, you know, the second-ish stage, moving into, you know, as we wanted to get into more live programming. Then, lo and behold, into May, when the new guidance just kind of popped up on everybody from the CDC and the governor, you know, we really wanted to kind of take a step back and like make a decision that again made sense for our artists, made sense for the dancers at Dogtown, but then you know, was keeping in line with what with that new guidance that had just come out. So really worked with the board of directors at Dogtown, as well as I'm on the presenters council for Dance USA. So leaning into that network, to see kind of what some other venues that were like us were planning to do, with you know, if they had that kind of updated guidance, and working with our lawyer too. Thank you to Justin, because a lot of what he mentioned actually we did implement. We put into place that if you're fully vaccinated at Dogtown, masks are not required. We do recommend them if you would prefer to feel comfortable. You know, we're happy to have you, you know, continue to wear your mask in classes and in performances. And then we do have the online like checkbox that Justin mentioned for ticket buyers and for folks that come to take classes or use the space for rehearsals. And I wanted to just write what we had because it was, you know, approved by our lawyer, and I'm happy to send this if anybody would like to have this. But our wording says that I understand that if I choose to attend a performance or class or rehearsal without a face covering at Dogtown, then I am ensuring I have been fully vaccinated from COVID-19. That means 2 shots of Moderna or Pfizer or 1 shot of Johnson & Johnson with a 2-week wait period following. Otherwise, I will continue to wear a face covering. And then the second checkbox says that we understand the risks associated with any activities happening within the facility. So this past weekend, actually, we had our first performance back since these new guidelines came out, Richmond Dance Festival. And it was amazing because we sold out 2 shows. And so we're excited. You know, there were a lot of folks in the audience that had masks, but there were, you know, folks in the audience that did. Performers were not required to wear masks, but they did have to click that checkbox, you know. And I think the last thing I'll say is just like, you know, what is the biggest challenge? And I think this is something that we're all like really kind of, you know, still grappling with, is that the financial recovery from this last year is ongoing. And it's something that, you know, I, as the director, I'm spending a lot of time still trying to figure out. You know, there's a balance of wanting to support artists and help them present, you know, work, but, you know, where's that, you know, dollar sign kind of lay? But we're working with artists. What we've decided and what the board has said is like we're doing a case by case basis and working with folks to really make sure that their goals and needs are getting met, but at the same time the organizations are. You know, I think that I was actually in a meeting right before this. The Giving USA numbers came out today, and philanthropy overall for the, you know, nonprofit sector, and arts and culture had the biggest drop out of every giving bucket. In, you know, the report classifies, and there was a 13% 13% of all arts and culture organizations were not confident if they were going to be able to survive. So I think, you know, making sure that yes, folks are vaccinated, let's get this earned revenue back up, but then, you know, speaking to the importance of like supporting these organizations, because it really does make a difference in our communities, is going to be really important. So thank you for the time. Happy to share anything else.
Thanks so much, Jess. Interesting that statistic you just shared. I know when we polled our audience, our arts and culture leaders back in February, 96% of the folks on a call like this one said they were confident they'd get through. So hopefully we're feeling better in Richmond maybe than nationally. But thank you for sharing that. Any questions for Kay or for Jess from the group? Raise your hand on the digital. No questions? Anything in the chat? You can put something in the chat. Or everyone just wants to go have lunch now because we're 15 minutes past, perhaps. Great. Well, thank you very much, Jess. Thank you very much, Kay. Thank you, Justin, and to all of our speakers. And Rebecca, I know you're on the chat answering questions too. Thank you very much. Really appreciate everyone. I appreciate everything that everyone is doing. Let's go out there, and to me, it feels like we're about to see an explosion of arts and culture like nothing we've seen since the Renaissance. And so I'm excited to see what all of us can do to make that happen. Let's make sure we do it as safely as we can. Again, we'll try and post this video, and we'll create a very rustic FAQ coming out of this, and we'll put all that and any other resources that folks want to share. You can email this to me directly, scott@richmondcultureworks.org, and we'll get those posted to our resources page on the COVID tab of the website as soon as we can. Jess, you put your hand up. Was there something else you wanted to say? Oh, got it. So that was applause. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll call that a wrap. Take care.